Have you ever missed the last train home? Imagine standing alone on an empty platform, believing you'll have to wait until morning. Then, out of the thick fog, another train arrives. It's not on the schedule. No announcements are made. No destination is displayed. And no one has ever seen it before. Would you get on? Daniel Brooks never believed in ghost stories. As a young journalist who specialized in forgotten places and unexplained mysteries, he had spent years exposing urban legends as nothing more than misunderstood history. Every abandoned building had an explanation. Every local myth had a logical answer. Or so he believed. That belief brought him to Blackwood Station. Hidden deep in the countryside, Blackwood had once been one of the busiest railway stations in the region. Now it sat silent. The tracks were rusted. The ticket office was empty. Broken clocks hung from cracked walls. Nature had slowly begun reclaiming everything. Daniel arrived early that afternoon carrying nothing more than a backpack, a notebook, his camera, and endless curiosity. He spent hours photographing the abandoned platforms, interviewing nearby residents, searching old newspaper archives. Everyone told him exactly the same story. Every few decades, a train appeared after midnight, no company owned it. No railway records mentioned it, and no one who boarded it ever returned the same. Daniel smiled every time he heard the story. People loved mysteries, especially ones that couldn't be explained. As sunset approached, nearly everyone left the station. Only one person remained, the elderly caretaker. His name was Mr. Harris. He had watched over Blackwood Station for more than 40 years. Before locking the waiting room, he looked directly at Daniel. "You've got about 30 minutes. Daniel laughed. "Until what?" "The last real train." And after that, the old man became unusually serious. "If another train arrives, don't get on." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You actually believe that story?" Mr. Harris didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and removed an old pocket watch. The glass was cracked. The hands had stopped at exactly midnight. "My father gave me this. He told me he got it from a man who boarded that train." Daniel examined it. The watch was frozen, never moving. What happened to him? Mr. Harris quietly replied, "He came back." But he never remembered where he'd been. The old man turned and walked away. Daniel watched him disappear into the darkness. Soon, he was completely alone. The station became eerily quiet. No birds. No wind. Not even insects. Only silence. At exactly 11:58 p.m., the old station clock suddenly began ticking. Daniel looked up. It hadn't worked in decades. Tick, tick, tick. Each second echoed across the empty platform. Midnight. The clock struck 12. At that exact moment, a long train whistle echoed through the fog. Daniel immediately stood up. His heart raced. There shouldn't have been another train. The railway line had officially closed hours earlier. Yet bright headlights slowly emerged through the mist. The sound grew louder. Steel wheels rolled across forgotten tracks. Then, a long black train glided silently onto platform 3. Daniel grabbed his camera. The train looked unlike anything he'd ever seen. Its polished black exterior reflected the moonlight. Not a single company logo. No destination sign. No carriage numbers. Every window glowed with warm golden light. But something felt wrong. There was no driver visible. No conductor. No station announcement. The train simply stopped. The doors slowly opened. No passengers stepped out. No voices could be heard. The train waited. Almost as if it already knew someone was supposed to board. Daniel looked around. The platform was empty. He was completely alone. Then he noticed something strange. One carriage door stood directly in front of him. Inside, a single light flickered. And just beyond the entrance, someone appeared to be sitting by the window, watching him, perfectly still. Daniel lifted his camera and zoomed in. The seat was empty. He lowered the camera. Someone was there again, watching. Without thinking, he took one careful step toward the train. Then another. The warm light spilling from the open doorway felt strangely inviting. Almost familiar. Behind him, the station disappeared into thick fog. Ahead of him, the silent train waited patiently, as though it had traveled a very long way, just for him. Daniel took a deep breath, clutched his camera tightly, and stepped aboard. The doors closed behind him. Without making a sound, the train began to move. Only then did Daniel notice something that made his blood run cold. There wasn't a single engine pulling the train. Yet somehow, it was already leaving the station. And outside the window, Blackwood Station had vanished. Daniel rushed to the nearest window. His heart pounded against his chest. Only a few seconds had passed since the train left the station. But Blackwood Station was already gone. There were no tracks, no platform, no lights. Outside the window stretched an endless blanket of silver fog. It was as if the station had never existed. Daniel rubbed the glass, hoping it was only condensation. Nothing changed. The train continued moving through complete silence. Not the normal silence of a late-night journey. A deeper silence. One so complete that even the sound of the train's wheels had disappeared. Only the faint ticking of an old clock echoed somewhere inside the carriage. Tick, tick, tick. Daniel slowly turned around. The inside of the train looked untouched by time. Dark wooden walls reflected the warm glow of vintage lamps. Golden luggage racks lined the ceiling. The seats were covered in deep red velvet. Everything looked immaculate, as though the train had been cleaned only moments before. Yet there was no dust, no scratches, no signs of age. It felt frozen in time. The passengers remained perfectly still. A businessman in an old gray suit stared out the window without blinking. Across from him sat a woman wearing clothes from another era, gently holding an antique suitcase. Farther down the carriage, a little boy clutched a wooden toy train. None of them spoke. None of them acknowledged Daniel. It was as though he didn't exist. Trying to calm himself, Daniel quietly walked through the aisle. Every passenger seemed to belong to a different decade. One man wore clothing from the 1940s. Another looked as though he had stepped out of the 1970s. A young woman wore a modern business suit while scrolling through a smartphone that never lit up. Different generations, sharing the same journey. Yet none of them exchanged a single word. Daniel lifted his camera. Click. The flash briefly illuminated the carriage. Several passengers slowly turned toward him. Not with anger. Not with surprise. But with sadness. As though they already knew how his story would end. Daniel swallowed hard. He lowered the camera. When he checked the photograph, the carriage was completely empty. Every seat was vacant. He looked up again. The passengers were back. Still staring. Still silent. A chill ran down his spine. He slipped the camera back into his bag. Suddenly, a calm voice echoed through the train. Tickets, please. Daniel looked toward the next carriage. An elderly conductor slowly approached. His uniform was spotless. His silver pocket watch hung neatly from his vest. His expression revealed nothing. He stopped beside Daniel. Your ticket. Daniel forced a nervous smile. I don't have one. The conductor nodded. I know. You never bought one. Daniel frowned. Then why am I here? The conductor simply pointed farther down. The carriage. There. Daniel followed his finger. At the very last seat, a single ticket rested on dark red fabric. Nobody sat beside it. Nobody touched it. The ticket appeared brand new. Daniel slowly picked it up. His hands began trembling. Printed across the top were words that made his blood run cold. Passenger, Daniel Brooks. Below his name, there was no destination. Only one word. Pending. What does this mean? Daniel whispered. The conductor looked at him calmly. It means your destination hasn't been chosen. Daniel stared in confusion. I don't understand. You will. The conductor tipped his hat, then continued walking. Before disappearing into the next carriage, he quietly added, every passenger chooses. Not everyone realizes they've already boarded. Daniel sat down, unable to process what he had just heard. Outside, the fog slowly faded. What replaced it was impossible. Entire cities drifted past the windows. Cities Daniel had never seen before. Towering buildings swallowed by forests. Ancient castles standing untouched beneath glowing skies. Railway stations abandoned hundreds of years ago. Then, he recognized one place. His childhood hometown. Exactly as it had looked 20 years earlier. He saw himself as a little boy waving goodbye to his father before he boarded a train for work. Daniel froze. His father smiled. The train departed. It was the last time Daniel ever saw him. Tears filled his eyes. He pressed his hand against the window. Dad. The image vanished. The train continued forward. The next scene appeared. A future Daniel had never lived. An older version of himself stood on a stage receiving an award for investigative journalism. People applauded. His family smiled proudly. The vision disappeared almost instantly. Then another future appeared. Daniel living completely alone. Older. Regretful. Looking out the same train window. Waiting. The visions continued. Changing faster and faster. Each one showing a different life. Different choices. Different endings. The train wasn't showing him memories. It was showing him possibilities. As Daniel tried to make sense of everything, the carriage lights flickered. For the first time since boarding, every passenger slowly turned their heads toward the front of the train. No one spoke. No one moved. Yet fear filled every face. Even the conductor had stopped walking. The train began slowing down. Not because it had reached a station, but because something enormous stood on the tracks ahead. A dark silhouette emerged from the thick fog. Far too large to be human. Perfectly still. Waiting. The conductor removed his cap. His calm expression disappeared for the first time. He quietly whispered, "We're early." Then he looked directly at Daniel. And that's never happened before. The train rolled closer. The mysterious figure did not move. It simply waited, as though it had been expecting Daniel all along. Life is shaped by the choices we make, especially when we stand at life's crossroads. While it's natural to dwell on past regrets or fear the unknown future, true growth comes from choosing to move forward with courage and wisdom. Some journeys don't change where we are, they change who we become. Sometimes, the greatest destination isn't a place at all, but the person we decide to become along the way.